President Trump makes his choice for the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. He is former Fed governor and Wall Street denizen Kevin Warsh. So how have the markets, both financial and political, responded to that choice? Plus, Republicans lose a state Senate seat in Texas that normally would not be of note. But when you lose a safe seat by 14 points, and it means a 31-point swing away from your party as recently as 2024, something is up. What does it tell us about what might happen in November?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome to Potomac Watch, our daily political podcast of the Wall Street Journal opinion pages. I'm Paul Gigot, and I'm here with Joe Sternberg and Kim Strassel. First, let's take up the announcement Friday that Kevin Warsh is Trump's choice to replace Jerome Powell as head of the central bank when Powell steps down when his term ends in May. Warsh still must be confirmed by the Senate, and more on that logistical exercise in a bit. But let's listen to President Trump on Friday answer a question about Warsh.
I want to keep it nice and pure, but he certainly wants to cut rates. I've been watching him for a long time.
Senator Thom Tillis. Did you have any concerns about his hawkish history of pushing for rate hikes?
He's going to want to do the same thing. I think that, I've had times when I think you've had to really have rate hikes too. But he's very smart, very good, strong, young, pretty young. And I think he's going to do a good. I mean, he was the central casting guy that people wanted. Kevin was great. I tell you what, I met numerous people. Every one of them were fantastic, really fantastic. I wanted to keep Kevin here. And I thought that I called Kevin 1, Kevin 2. And we have, I said, it's going to be a Kevin. But, Kevin really has been fantastic at the White House. You all know him. You know him very well. And so we have Kevin W.
Are you concerned, Mr. President, about the confirmation hearings? We've heard
No.
Senator Tillis.
No.
You think with the DOJ investigation that's going on?
This is, in the whole country, I would say that this was the perfect candidate. This was not a surprise or anything. This was the man that's most qualified. Top student, best schools, everything was like perfect. Youngest person ever to serve on the Fed. Got the whole package. Looks don't mean anything, but he's got the look.
Yeah, those looks don't mean anything, but he's got it in any case. The other Kevin the president's talking about is Kevin Hassett, who is the chairman of the National Economic Council at the White House and was in the running for the job of Fed chairman. But the president decided that he should stay in the White House and went with Kevin Warsh. It's an interesting pick. We wrote enthusiastically about the choice in our opinion pages. Joe, what do you think? What's your impression of the reaction so far in financial markets, and both home and abroad?
Well, I had the impression that Wall Street was not as enthusiastic about this nomination as they probably should have been, at least at the beginning. Although if you look at equity prices over the past, day or so, they seem to be coming back to their senses. The concern all along has been, and this is partly of President Trump's own making, that because of this beauty contest that we've been suffering through might be the better phrase, to find a successor for Jerome Powell, any nominee that Trump would pick would be politically compromised in some way. I think the perception was that Trump was only going to pick someone who he thought would bow to his will, particularly on cutting interest rates, whether or not that's appropriate for the economy. So I think that there is perhaps a sense of suspicion out there just by virtue of the fact that Kevin Warsh has been nominated by Trump here. But I would hope that people will conclude over time that that's not justified, because I think that Kevin Warsh is a serious thinker on monetary policy. And even if at times he might think that interest rates are at an inappropriate level, either too high or too low, that is not a political judgment about what he would have to do to cater to President Trump's interests, but I think it feeds into his broader understanding of the need for the reform of the way that the Fed operates. So I think that this is a serious pick once you get past that suspicion people were always going to have of anyone that Trump would nominate.
Probably there would have been a greater suspicion had the president picked Kevin Hassett, because Hassett has worked directly in the White House. So that would have been I think, more suspect in the financial markets. Chris Waller, the other competitor, who is a current Fed governor, seems to have tailored many of his votes for larger cuts directed at the president. Say, see, hey, I'm over here. Pick me. I'll do what you want. And then Rick Reeder of the Wall Street firm BlackRock was an easier money man, and he would have been less reassuring on that front. What Kevin Warsh decides to do, of course, remains to be seen. He'll have to manage Donald Trump. It was interesting, Kim, the markets, gold and silver crashed on Friday prices after a significant run-up. That seemed to be, they were overbought for sure, because they both run up so far. But I think Warsh the pick might have been the trigger for that, because they are, as you know, stores of value seen as hedges against inflation. So if you got inflation hawk at the Fed, maybe gold and silver aren't such good bets.
Yeah. And look, there's been all this talk now about Kevin Warsh and his views on interest rates. And it is true. He has traditionally been more of a hawk on interest rates. Up until a little more than a year ago, he was very opposed to lowering rates further. The fact that more recently he's been more open to it was suggested that he was catering to Trump. But, honestly, I think he's been a credible enough contributor over his years to have earned the benefit of the doubt as to what his views are here. And that seems to be the view that's being taken by the market. I think also being absorbed by the things that Joe mentioned is that he was clearly brought in because of his longtime belief that the Fed needs systemic reform. And that is a big, I think, an attractive aspect of his tenure, of his choice. And so I think that for those out there in the markets and elsewhere who have been interested in seeing that, because they've been concerned that there has been this sort of generational drift, that is also working in his favor.
Let's talk a little bit about that reform the Fed agenda that he has. Joe, one thing he's made clear in op-eds in our pages over the years, that he wants the Fed to be less involved in politics. He doesn't think that they should, for example, have put climate change into the financial regulatory regime when they're looking at banks. He doesn't think that the Fed should change monetary policy because you have a special goal of increasing unemployment by race, for example, which the Fed toyed with a little bit in the early parts of the Biden administration. He thinks that the Fed should also get out of fiscal policy, and it should get out of allocation of capital, that is, leaning into one area of the economy or another. For example, buying mortgage-backed securities, which are intended to keep mortgage rates lower than they otherwise might be, which helps housing or can help housing. But why does a central bank want to give housing a boost? That's not its job. Its job is stable prices and, under Congress's mandate, full employment. It isn't to say housing yes, AI no, AI yes, housing no. It's supposed to be neutral in the price of money, price stability. Joe, what do you think of the Warsh agenda?
Well, so what's really interesting about this, Paul, you have just enumerated a bunch of discrete examples where I think that people, particularly conservatives, tend to get very anxious about things that the Fed has been starting to do really since the 2008 financial panic. What I find really appealing about Kevin Warsh as a Fed nominee and just as a thinker on these issues is that he has a holistic understanding of how we got to the point where the Fed is doing all of those discrete things. And he understands that the solution is not to kind of hammer at one thing and then hammer at the next thing, but that you need a bigger rethink of the way that the Fed operates. And so I think one of the problems that they have is just theoretical, the way that the Fed's research department, all of those PhD economists on staff, think about what it is that the Fed is doing and what it should be doing, how they think that monetary policy affects the economy, the trade-offs that they think the Fed is making between unemployment and inflation, even though there's mixed evidence at best that those trade-offs exist. He has a lot to say about the theory of central banking. And from that, it leads into this discussion about the practice of central banking, the way the Fed has become involved in, for example, quantitative easing, where they dramatically expanded their balance sheet by buying government bonds and mortgage-backed securities after 2007. And the effects that that has on the way that the Fed interacts with the economy and creates the temptation for a lot of the mischief, Paul, that you were describing. I mean, this discussion about the role of monetary policy in climate issues or racial disparities in employment or that sort of thing. And I think that's an important thing for Republicans in the Senate in particular to keep in mind as they are thinking about this nomination over the next couple months. Because if you want to solve any of these problems, you have to have someone who fully understands how the Fed got itself into this situation, what has gone awry in the way that Fed economists think about the economy, that then opens the door to all of these problematic behaviors once the Fed goes to set monetary policy.
All right. Lots to parse there in the coming weeks and months. We won't get into that too much more. But for now, Kim, let's talk about the political response to Warsh's nomination. It's kind of broken down on party lines, as you would expect. Republicans mostly enthusiastic or entirely enthusiastic. I haven't seen a discouraging word. Democrats, of course, opposed because Trump made the nomination. And in the press, the liberal commentariat is giving him a lot of guff, which is quite amusing. And some of the commentary saying, "Oh my gosh, he was skeptical about inflation, even when," and some saying, and skeptical about quantitative easing, oh my gosh, that's so terrible. When, of course, that skepticism has been borne out in this huge inflation we had in the Biden presidency, which I think was the root of the ruination of the Biden presidency. And you would think the Democrats would recognize that and say, hey, maybe we should have thought twice about all of that quantitative easing and all that flooding of the zone of money. And then I would argue, even going back to the 2010s, in the wake of the crisis, QE was seen by the federal bank, the Federal Reserve, the central bank, as this huge boost to the economy. It's going to grow really fast. And if you look at what the Fed predicted the economy would do in those years under Ben Bernanke and Janet Yellen, and then what it actually did, the Fed overestimated the impact of all of this. So we had a kind of slow growth, very anemic recovery by historic standards. And Warsh essentially, called that out. Now, the problem Warsh is going to have getting confirmed is, of course, the Senate Banking Committee. He has to go through there. And Thom Tillis, a Republican from North Carolina, no longer running for re-election this year, he has said, I will not confirm any nominee. He said this before Warsh was appointed, unless the president cleans up this subpoena issue and this investigation into Jerome Powell. Let's listen to Thom Tillis.
No, it doesn't. I am pleased with the nominee. I think that by most accounts, he's well regarded, but we still have to clear the current matter. Look, they're pursuing on the basis of criminal intent testimony in a banking committee hearing that clearly had no criminal intent. So to me, you got some assistant U.S. attorney with a dream in the D.C. district that should really determine whether or not this frivolous prosecution is worth holding up a Fed board seat.
Kim, I happen to agree with Tillis about Powell's testimony on the reconstruction of the Fed building. It has had cost overruns for sure, but did Powell lie about it to the Senate? I've looked at the transcript; sure doesn't look like it to me. And the question is, if Tillis holds to this conviction, he could block the Warsh nomination. Trump doesn't want that because sure doesn't want Jerome Powell sticking around and running the show. So is he going to have to call off Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. attorney for the D.C. district, on this?
Yeah, probably. First of all, Paul, before I talk about Tillis, just your point about all this sniping by the press. I remember when I first went to DC, my boss, that would be you, told me to be very skeptical of conventional wisdom and how a groupthink came to, take over everyone inside the Beltway. And I find this completely fascinating. It was only about a generation ago where the central bank's mission was obviously very different. I would argue a lot more pure, less interventionist in fiscal and economic policy. And then you had Bernanke come in and this quantitative easing. And of course, it was justified that you needed this to hold down long-term rates after the financial crisis. You had to ensure banks had enough reserves to fund themselves. You had to keep markets functioning. Warsh has seen through that, and he has pointed out all the terrible harm that has come as a result of making this policy, rather than an emergency time, but kind of a permanent part of Fed policy. And central to these models and the way all of these Fed staff work, by the way, I love Warsh likes to call all these folks an economic guild, which is the perfect way of describing all the folks inside of the Fed and this groupthink mentality. But, he pointed out that all this has really done is it's encouraged the federal government to run really steep deficits. It's suppressed market signals, and it's probably been a cause of inflation. And so I am actually looking forward on a long-term basis, assuming that Warsh gets through the Senate, and I think he will. It's going to be the battle with those insiders and that conventional wisdom that are going to be his sort of day-to-day challenge and really tough thing to overcome. In terms of Tillis, look, he's made his position extremely clear. And I would note he sits on the Senate Banking Committee. If his vote is not there, then you have a deadlock on that committee. And so It's not enough to move people through and onto the floor. Trump put out this bizarre statement suggesting that he'd just outweight Tillis, like wait until Tillis wasn't in his seat anymore. Well, I would remind him that's next January. This seat is coming open this spring. He's clearly very unhappy with Jay Powell, and I'm not quite sure how it helps his ambitions at all to keep Jay Powell or a temporary person in that seat who he has no interest or no say over for a shorter period of or a longer period of time. You might as well get his guy in place. That is going to involve him. And now everyone gets nervous because you're not supposed to talk about this. Obviously, the president doesn't have anything to do with what happens at the Department of Justice, right? Right. Except for, I think we all have to assume that this investigation against Jay Powell would not be going on if the president hadn't made his wishes very clear that it should be going on. It should not be difficult for him to send a similar nod and a wink that it would be good just to see it wrapped up. And by the way, the Department of Justice is totally capable of doing that, saying, we have now investigated this further. We see no cause for charges. This is being wrapped up and put away. That would be the smartest thing for the president to do. And then this would be clear sailing through the Senate. There's no question that there are enough votes to confirm Kevin Warsh.
I have not seen the subpoena that the U.S. Attorney's Office sent to Powell and the Fed, but I have had it described to me. And what my sources describe is that it's a pretty open-ended fishing expedition.
Yeah.
That is, it doesn't say we think there's a violation of this or that crime. It's just looking for all kinds of information, anything that maybe they can pin some kind of charge against Powell. And of course, those are always the most dangerous subpoenas. But I think it underscores the fact that this isn't this is quite a political investigation. Now, it's also counterproductive for the president, not only Joe, about the confirmation of Kevin Warsh potentially, but also Jerome Powell's seat. His term as chairman ends in May, but his term at the Fed as a governor doesn't end until 2028. So if Jay Powell sticks around, as he could, as a regular governor, that would be an unusual decision for a former chairman, but he could. And if he did, then President Trump wouldn't get another appointment to the Fed who could, he could name somebody who is sort of a wingman on policy to Kevin Warsh, a David Malpass, for example, our contributor, somebody else who knows central banking. And it's not in Trump's interest to have Jay Powell sticking around. So, and Powell is going to stick around, I would bet, if this is still pending, this criminal investigation. Joe, what do you think?
Trump has always been so self-defeating in his dealings with the Fed. I mean, it's a perverse knack that he has for this, because you end up in the situation where I think that the Fed's instincts, if they had been completely left alone and Trump had never said anything about them, probably would have been to deliver the kind of interest rate cuts that he has been angling for on something approximating the timetable that he was hoping for earlier in 2025 than they ended up coming. All of the Fed statements have tended to suggest that they are thinking in that direction. And yet Trump has made it very difficult for them to do that, because they do have a strong sense of their institutional independence within the government and the importance of that. And they bristle at any suggestion of political interference. And so the fact that Trump kept harping on Powell to deliver these rate cuts made it difficult for Powell to deliver, even though he probably wanted to, because Powell didn't want to create the impression that they were giving into the political pressure. And this whole kerfuffle with the subpoena, and whether Powell would then leave the Fed board, he probably wants to be able to retire at this point. I mean, if you were in his position, wouldn't you? And it is customary to step aside if you've been the chairman. And yet, because I think that he does have a strong sense of the Fed's institutional prerogatives and what's at stake in defending the Fed's independence from this kind of political meddling that we see, especially because the subpoena does appear to be very, very political. Trump is making it much harder for Powell to do the thing that Powell probably wants to do and that Trump would want him to do.
I think that is right. All right, let's turn here before we finish to this Texas state Senate race, which came as a shock to Republicans rolling through the countryside like a bomb blast radiating out from Fort Worth, Texas, and Tarrant County. State Senate races usually ignorable, but this one wasn't. Democrat Taylor Remmett defeated Republican Lee Wamgans by 14 points in a district that Donald Trump carried in 2024 by 17 points. That's a 31-point swing, which is enormous. And it happened in a district that has long been safe for Republicans. So what's the signal here to Republicans, Kim?
Well, a couple of other things about this race, not just that 31-point swing. The Republican in the race had a Truth Social endorsement from Mr. Trump, also vastly outspent the Democrat in the race. Notable that Democrats and independents came out in masses, similar to what we saw last November when these special elections in Virginia and New Jersey, in which Republicans lost both of those governorships. Republican turnout was way down. This is a trend that we are seeing with huge swings, double-digit swings toward Democrats in special elections, also for the U.S. House. What does this say? Well, I don't think that this is a coincidence, Paul. This comes right after the killings by immigration agents of 2 Americans in Minneapolis, and this extraordinary deportation strategy that has become so central to the Trump administration. This is coming. They're very unsettled about it. There are underlying aspects of Donald Trump's immigration policy that people very much appreciate, including the sealing of the border. By the way, you would have thought that that would resonate in particular to his advantage in Texas, which has been a frontline state and dealt with a lot of the problems of Biden's border. But all of that has been erased by concerns about other aspects of his immigration policy instead that people feel have gone too far. There's also a very strong feeling when you read the polls among most voters that the president is simply not focused enough on the things that are top of their mind, in particular economy, prices, inflation, other worries. They have seen this has been all that there has been in the headlines. And so, look, Republicans, they have the potential to have immigration be a winning issue for them, having been reversed some of the worst excesses of the Biden years. Instead, they are turning it into a liability. It's also pushing out things that the administration should be more focused on. And this is just a great big warning sign to them that they have got a few months to get themselves straight here with voters before the midterm elections, in which case they could be looking at the kind of wipeout that we saw in Donald Trump's first midterm elections in 2018.
When they lost 41 House seats on net, and that was the end of the Trump legislative initiatives, other than pandemic-related legislation. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, sent out a tweet after the race saying, "Whoa, let's be careful about this." The lieutenant governor of Texas also warning that this is a big, big alarm bell that has to be addressed. And I think it's going to really add to the debate going on in the White House, Joe, that whether or not the immigration strategy that the administration has been pursuing, which is creating a somewhat of a sense of chaos, a sense of lack of control and excess, needs to be pared back. And I know there are voices in the White House that would like that, but Stephen Miller, the deputy White House chief of staff, wants to keep going, thinks immigration is a net positive for the administration and for Republicans in the fall. But as Kim suggests, it was in 2024, may not be in 2026 if this trend continues.
Yeah, Paul, the key word you used in there is chaos. I had a strong sense after the 2024 election that voters had really elected Trump to try to restore some order. They wanted more order in immigration policy. They wanted, in a sense, that there was better order in the economy, particularly on inflation. My sense is that the Trump and Republicans' big vulnerability right now is any of those instances where it feels like he's bringing more chaos instead of more order. So that shows up in the way that they have started doing some of the immigration enforcement, especially what people saw in Minneapolis. Shows up on the economy, where you have a lot of the chaotic tariff policies often working against the better aspects of their agenda. And my sense is the challenge is to really get a grip on the chaos factor and be able to explain to people that they are working in a controlled, coordinated fashion on the kind of agenda that people elected them to do.
All right. Strassel gave good advice on Friday, as usual. Let's hope somebody stuck it in front of the president. All right. Thanks to Joe Sternberg. Thanks to Kim Strassel. We're here every day on Potomac Watch. Thanks for listening.